Hello and welcome to News Click. We have with us today Tabish Khair, who is a writer, academic, political commentator, multiple identities. Apart from being an Indian Muslim writer in Denmark, that must also give you again multiple identities. Tabish, good to have you with us.
Thank you.
Question, of course, that comes immediately. How do you negotiate between all this multiple identity?
Well, I guess I don't think too much about them in a conscious way. I mean, they're all bits and pieces of me. And all I do is try and live out my life as fully as I possibly can. So I guess these multiple identities influence what I write. But that happens in the process of writing and thinking and not prior to it.
You've written quite extensively about what being a minority means, that you are, in that sense, always the outsider, always the other, partly when you were here in India earlier, now of course even more perhaps sharply in Denmark, where the Islam identity is in that sense quite important for the Danish public. How do you really see this? Do you think that it ghettoizes you partially, it puts you in some bracket, as it were, not universal, always being the particular? How do you really see this?
I feel in many ways, and I start off by giving you some kind of background to situate my position, so to say. In many ways, I feel I have grown up as part of different minorities. Also as a writer, as a creative writer, because I grew up in a small place called Gaya in Bihar. I was educated there. I did my master's from Bihar, from Gaya, not even Patna or Ranchi. And I think I'm probably the only internationally published Indian English writer who not only grew up in a small town, but was educated there. So in that sense, I was, again, and I am part of a minority. I don't belong to the kind of group to which Arundhati Roy or Vikram Seth or Salman Rushdie belong. So, and again, in different ways, religious, linguistically, there are all these different kinds of minorities. And I feel in my case, it has mostly enabled me to think more closely about certain things. I think if you have a feeling that you belong to the majority, and that's largely a misleading feeling because in many ways all of us belong to some minority or the other. It's more a question of whether you're willing to face up to it or not. But if you feel that you belong to a kind of majority, it can deaden you at times. You take so many things for granted. You don't question them. The problem with belonging to a minority is, again, that if you have a very intense feeling of marginalization, it can lead to bitterness and anger. So there are dangers on both sides. It's a question of how one negotiates one's identity, one's trajectory as, first of all, a human being, and then a writer or whatever else one might be. Now, Denmark obviously is a slightly different matter from, say, India. Denmark is, again, a lovely country. I have many good Danish friends. But at the moment, there are certain assumptions about, in particular, Muslims. Now, I don't come across as a Muslim.
You know, Europe has this basic self-identity that it is more inclusive, more tolerant, more, what shall we say, democratic, more secular, in spite of the fact that they have had the largest histories of ethnic cleansing, of actually persecuting minorities, genocide, of course, in a few cases, but certainly very large persecution of minorities, throwing them outside the country and so on. How is it that they don't see the continuity of that and trying to impose, for instance, dress codes on women in France, whatever may be the impulse from, also saying this kind of architecture, minarets in Switzerland is not okay. Don't they see the continuity or the contradictions of these things?
I think part of the problem is that European countries in particular, and highly Europeanized spaces later on, ended up colonizing much of the rest of the world. So they had the space and the money to end up becoming what they are, not just financially, but culturally. Which meant that at times it involved, if not ethnic cleansing, then at least quite a lot of harsh treatment meted out to minorities and also to poor people, booted out arbitrarily, deported to the colonies and so on, or forced to go off to the colonies. As late as the early 20th century, I've forgotten the name of the British politician, but a major British politician went on record as saying, well, Britain might be a small island, but we have the entire world to settle in. Now, that advantage is something that we don't have. And on the other hand, we also have very interesting mixes of culture. The problem in the third world at times is that our models of nationality have, to some extent, to a large extent, been manufactured in the West. And in the West, especially a place like Denmark, there's this assumption that you have one nation, you have one language, you have one culture, you have one society. It's a problematic assumption. I'm not even sure it exists there, but there's that a dominant assumption.
It's a normative assumption of the nation.
Exactly. And enough of it seems to be true for it to remain largely unquestioned. Now, in India, it will naturally be questioned, like it's just not possible in India or Nigeria or any third world country. And I think that's part of the problem. I mean, we need to work out models of nationality, if one may say so, that are not based on the European pattern, because that's a pattern that has been built on genocide and marginalization and huge exploitation of the rest of the world.
Thanks, Tabish, for this section of the interview. We'll be back again with the next section, so do please see the next part. Thank you.